The black dress I wore to my husband's funeral cost more than my first car, but it felt like a costume. I stood in the corner of the Ashbourne Estate's massive library, clutching my 8-month-old son, Coulson, to my chest. The room smelled of expensive lilies and old money. No one looked me in the eye. They just whispered near the buffet, glancing at Tate's widow with pity that felt a lot like judgment. My name is Keeley. I'm 33 years old, a designer who sees the world in textures and light. Until 1 week ago, I was the wife of the golden boy of Hampton's real estate. Now I was just an obstacle. The heavy doors creaked open, and my mother-in-law, Victoria Ashbourne, walked in. She didn't come to hug me. She came with the family lawyer. She didn't even look at the baby. "We need to discuss the living arrangements," Victoria said, her voice smooth as glass. "I spoke to Judge Hemlock this morning. Given your recent hysterical outbursts since Tate's passing, combined with your lack of income, he signed an emergency ex parte order granting the trust temporary custody of Coulson." I froze. "You can't take my son based on lies." "It's a court order," she snapped, signaling security. "Stop making a scene. You were just the envelope, dear. We have the letter now. The envelope goes in the trash." I should have seen it coming. I should have known that to them I was just a utility. My mind flashed back to exactly 1 year ago. Tate and I were standing in a 6-bedroom mansion on the coast. It had been sitting on the market for 6 months, empty and cold. Tate was pacing, sweating through his shirt because Victoria was pressuring him to close the deal. "It's hopeless, Keeley," he had said, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like a hospital in here." "No," I told him. "It just lacks a pulse." I went to work. I didn't just move furniture. I created a feeling. I draped a cashmere throw over the reading chair to suggest a lazy Sunday morning. I swapped the harsh white bulbs for warm amber ones. I boiled cinnamon and vanilla in the kitchen so the air smelled like baking. I angled the dining table to catch the sunset perfectly. When I was done, the house wasn't a building anymore, it was a home. It sold the next day for a record price. "You're a genius, Tate." Victoria had cheered at the closing dinner. I waited for Tate to correct her, to say, "Actually, Keeley did the staging." But he didn't. He just smiled and raised his glass. That was the moment I realized my talent was the secret engine of the Ashbourne empire, but I was never going to be allowed in the driver's seat. Back in the present, the reality of my erasure hit me like a physical blow. 2 large security guards stepped forward at Victoria's signal. I tried to scream, but the shock had stolen my voice. They took Coulson from my arms. His confused little cry as they carried him away tore a hole in my chest that I knew would never heal. "Escort her off the property," Victoria commanded, turning her back to me to check her reflection in the mirror. They walked me to the front gate. It was raining, a cold, gray drizzle that soaked through my expensive dress instantly. "My car," I said, trembling. "I need my car keys." "The Range Rover is a company lease," one of the guards said, looking down. "We can't let you take it, ma'am. We packed your essentials in this suitcase. Everything else remains property of the estate." He set a single silver suitcase on the wet pavement. The gates buzzed and slammed shut. I stood there, shivering. I pulled out my phone to call a hotel, but my card was declined. I checked my bank app. Account flagged for audit. Tate had always insisted on handling the finances to save me the stress, leaving me with only joint cards. Now I realized it wasn't about stress. It was about control. It took me 2 days to find a place I could actually afford. I had to walk into a pawn shop on the highway and sell my diamond earrings just to get cash. I found a guest cottage behind a mechanic's shop in a town 20 miles away. The landlord, a grumpy man named Mr. Brixton, looked at my designer heels and the wad of cash in my hand. "It ain't the Ritz, lady," he grunted, not bothering with a credit check as he handed me the key. He was right. The cottage smelled of damp, wood, and mildew. The walls were a peeling, sickly yellow, and the single window was covered in grime. It was ugly. It was broken. It was perfect. I spent the rest of my pawn shop cash, not on food, but on paint and fabric. I scrubbed the floors until my manicured nails broke. I painted the walls a soft, creamy white to catch the limited light. I found cheap muslin cloth and sewed airy curtains. I foraged wildflowers from the roadside and placed them in a mason jar on the windowsill. 24 hours later, the damp shack looked like a rustic seaside retreat. I sat on the floor, eating a sandwich, and looked around. Victoria had taken my son. She had taken my money. But as the sunlight hit the clean white wall, I realized something important. They couldn't take my eye. They couldn't take the talent that made them rich. The next morning, I put on my only suit and walked into Hearth and Home Real Estate. It was nothing like the Ashbourne offices. There was no marble lobby or receptionist, just a cluttered room filled with mismatched desks and a woman with wild gray hair yelling into a phone. This was Grace. She ran the agency, and she was known for taking the listings nobody else wanted, the money pits, the oddballs, the disasters. She hung up the phone and looked me over. If you're selling cookies, I'm on a diet. If you're looking for a house, we only have broken ones. I'm not here to buy, I said, standing tall. I'm here to work. I'm a stager. Grace snorted. Honey, look around. We don't do staging. We barely do cleaning. That's why your listings sit for 2 years, I said boldly. I pointed to a flyer on her desk for the old Miller house. It was a notorious property that had been on the market forever. Give me 24 hours in the Miller house. If I don't get you an offer by Monday, I'll walk away. If I do, you hire me and I get a commission. Grace narrowed her eyes, chewing on the end of a pen. She looked at the stack of unpaid bills on her desk, then back at me. She tossed a set of keys across the room. You got 24 hours, Cinderella. Don't break anything. The Miller house was a disaster of dark wood paneling and heavy drapes that smelled like 1980. It felt like a cave. I didn't have a budget for luxury Italian sofas or crystal chandeliers, so I had to use what I had, imagination. I spent the entire night scrubbing the windows until the glass was invisible, letting the natural light flood in. I raided the attic and found an old, scratched rocking chair. I didn't hide the scratches. I draped a soft, knitted blanket over it and placed a half-read book on the side table. I was telling a story. I wanted the buyers to see a life, not a building. I didn't have money for baking supplies, so I brought a scratch pot from my cottage and used the oldest trick in the book. I boiled water with vanilla extract and a cinnamon stick on the stove. The scent was my secret weapon. Real estate is emotional, not logical. When the first couple walked in, the smell hit them instantly. It triggered memories of childhood, of safety, of Sunday mornings. They didn't see the dated cabinets. They saw a kitchen where a family could grow. I watched from the corner as the wife touched the back of the rocking chair and smiled. The house wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting for them. Grace called me 2 days later. Her voice, usually loud and brash, was barely a whisper. Keely, she said, what did you do to that house? I just staged it, I replied, holding my breath. We have 4 offers, she said, her voice rising in disbelief. 4. The highest one is 20% over the asking price. The buyers were crying in the driveway. They said it just felt right. I've been trying to dump that property for 2 years, and you sold it in 48 hours. When I walked into the office that afternoon, the atmosphere had changed. Grace didn't make a joke about my shoes. She pointed to a desk, the best one near the window. You're not a freelancer anymore, she stated firmly. You're my head of design. Whatever you did over there, do it again. We closed the deal 3 weeks later. My commission check was small compared to what I used to bring in for the Ashbournes, but it was enough to rent a slightly better apartment and hire a lawyer to start filing motions for visitation. Around town, the whispers started. Other agents began talking about the house whisperer at the little agency on Main Street who could turn a shack into a sanctuary. While I was building warmth, the Ashbourne empire was turning to ice. I kept tabs on their listings online. Victoria had replaced me with a prestigious design firm from New York City called Modern. Their style was expensive, sharp, and cold. I went to one of their open houses just to see. The living room looked like a museum lobby. The furniture was chrome and white leather, beautiful to look at, but terrifying to sit on. There were no personal touches, no sense of baking bread, no open books. It was sterile. I watched potential buyers walk through the space. They admired the art, but they kept their coats on. They didn't linger. They moved quickly from room to room, checking boxes but feeling nothing. A house that feels like a hotel doesn't sell quickly. I noticed their days on market, numbers creeping up. Listings that used to sell in a week under my care were now sitting for a month, then 2. Victoria was spending a fortune on prestige branding, but she was forgetting the most important rule of the business. People don't buy square footage, they buy a feeling. My lawyer finally secured a court-ordered visitation. 1 hour, supervised at the Ashbourne estate. Driving through those iron gates again made my stomach twist. But I would have walked through fire to see my son. I was led into the formal nursery. Coulson was sitting on a playmat, dressed in a stiff, starched outfit that looked uncomfortable. A uniformed nanny stood over him like a guard tower. She didn't smile at him. She just watched him. "Coulson," I choked out, dropping to my knees. His head snapped up, his eyes, so like his father's, locked onto mine. He let out a squeal that broke my heart and scrambled toward me. When I scooped him up, he buried his face in my neck, clinging to me with a desperation that a baby shouldn't have to feel. He smelled like expensive, unscented soap, not his usual lavender lotion. I spent the hour rocking him, singing the lullabies I used to hum when he was in my belly. I poured all my love into those 60 minutes. From the balcony above, I saw the curtains move. Victoria was watching us. She looked down with a scowl, annoyed that despite her money and her staff, the baby only wanted the one thing she couldn't buy, his mother. 2 weeks later, I attended the annual Hamptons real estate mixer. It was a room full of sharks in tailored suits. I stood near the back, sipping sparkling water when the crowd parted. Victoria Ashbourne glided through, holding court with a circle of admirers. She spotted me instantly. Her eyes raked over my off-the-rack dress. She decided to make an example of me. "Killy," she announced, her voice carrying over the music. "I heard you landed at a little strip mall agency. It must be so quaint compared to what you were used to." A few people chuckled. The room went quiet, waiting for me to crumble. I took a slow sip of my water and smiled. "Actually, Victoria, quaint is selling quite well," I said calmly. "Hearth and Home just closed the Henderson estate yesterday. Full ask, cash offer." The chuckles died instantly. The Henderson estate was a property the Ashbourne firm had lost the listing for just last month because they couldn't move it. Victoria's smile faltered. "Beginner's luck," she sniffed, turning away quickly, but the damage was done. The sharks in the room were looking at me differently now. I wasn't just the widow anymore. I was competition. And Victoria was starting to sweat. The tide began to turn, slowly at first, and then all at once. My phone at Hearth and Home didn't just ring, it demanded attention. Wealthy clients who had been loyal to the Ashbourne brand for decades were starting to defect. They were tired of the cold, impersonal style that Victoria was pushing. They didn't want houses that looked like art galleries. They wanted homes where they could raise their children. "We want what you did with the Henderson place," a prominent banker told me over the phone. "We want that warmth." I wasn't stealing clients. I didn't have to. They were walking away from the Ice Queen and coming to the fire I had built. With every commission, my bank account grew. I wasn't buying fancy clothes or cars. Every single cent went into a dedicated savings account labeled the Coulson Fund. I hired a shark of a custody lawyer, a woman who looked at the Ashbourne court order and didn't flinch. "They have money," she told me, "but you have momentum. Judges like stability, Killy. And right now, you're building a stable life while the Ashbourne reputation is starting to crack." I worked 16-hour days, fueled by coffee and the singular goal of getting my son back. I was winning the professional war, but the biggest battle was just appearing on the horizon. Then came the news that stopped the entire real estate world in its tracks. The Sovereign Estate hit the market. It was a legendary property, a massive, historic compound perched on the highest cliff overlooking the ocean. It had been in a private trust for 80 years. The listing price was a staggering $250 million. It was the most expensive listing in the country. Naturally, the Ashbourne firm landed it. Victoria went on every news channel, preening like a peacock. Selling the Sovereign Estate wouldn't just bring a $7.5 million commission. It would cement the Ashbourne dynasty for another century. It was the crown jewel. I watched her interview from my small office TV. Only the Ashbourne firm understands true luxury, she boasted to the camera. My stomach churned. If she sold that house, her power would be absolute. She could bury me in legal fees for the next 20 years. The stakes had never been higher. Victoria had bet everything on the sale. She poured millions into marketing, security, and staging, convinced that this was her victory lap. But I knew something she didn't. The bigger the house, the harder it is to make it feel like a home. 3 months passed. The Sovereign Estate was still for sale. In the world of high-stakes real estate, 90 days is an eternity. The excitement in the press had turned into skepticism. A property that sits on the market starts to smell like failure. The carrying costs were bleeding the owner dry. Taxes, maintenance, and staff cost hundreds of thousands every month. And because the Ashbourne firm had fronted the marketing costs, Victoria was bleeding too. I heard rumors from contractors that the house was a disaster inside. Victoria's high-priced New York designers had filled the historic halls with sharp, modern chrome and abstract sculptures. They treated the rooms like showrooms. It echoes in there, a painter told me. You can hear your own footsteps 3 rooms away. It's spooky. Prospective buyers, Saudi princes, tech moguls, celebrities would fly in on private helicopters, walk through the front door and walk right back out. They couldn't connect with it. It felt like a museum, not a sanctuary. Victoria was growing desperate. She fired the first design team and hired another, but they made the same mistake. They added more gold, more velvet, more stuff. They didn't understand that you can't buy soul. Just when it looked like the listing might expire, a new player entered the game, Mr. Thomas Kane. Kane was a ghost, a reclusive tech billionaire who had invented the software that ran half the world's servers. He was one of the few people on Earth who could write a check for $250 million without blinking. He was looking for a fortress for his family, a place to hide from the world. He arrived at the Sovereign Estate wearing a faded hoodie and sneakers that looked like they had been through a war. He ignored Victoria's outstretched hand. He walked through the grand ballroom, his shoes squeaking on the cold marble floors. Victoria trailed behind him, listing off facts about the imported chandeliers and the heated driveways. Kane stopped in the middle of the master suite. It was staged with a bed that looked like a throne and art that looked like a geometry test. He shivered. "It feels dead," Kane said, his voice flat. "I beg your pardon." Victoria stammered. "This is Italian marble." "There is no soul here," Kane interrupted, turning around. "It feels like a mausoleum. I have children, Mrs. Ashbourne. I can't raise them in a museum." Victoria panicked. If Kane walked, there was nobody else left to buy it. "We can change it. We can." "You had your chance," Kane said and walked out. 2 nights later, fate intervened. Thomas Kane attended a private dinner party in the Hamptons. He hated social events, but this was for a close business partner. He walked into the house, a charming, oceanfront property that had recently sold, and stopped. The lighting was warm and amber. The furniture was arranged to encourage conversation, not just to look good. There was a faint scent of sea salt and cedar in the air. He sat in a worn leather armchair by the fire, and, for the first time in months, his shoulders relaxed. He felt safe. He turned to the hostess. "This house," he said quietly, It breathes. Who designed this? The hostess smiled. Oh, we used a local woman. She's a miracle worker. She took this place from drab to dream in a week. I need her name, Kane demanded. The hostess reached into a drawer and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. It didn't have gold foil or embossed lettering. It just said Hearth and Home. Keeley, head of design. Kane stared at the card. He put it in his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed Victoria Ashbourne. He had an ultimatum to deliver. Victoria's phone rang late at night. When she saw Thomas Kane's private number, she answered on the first ring, her heart pounding. She was already mentally spending the commission, imagining the headlines that would praise her genius. Mr. Kane, she purred, have you reconsidered the sovereign estate? It truly is a masterpiece. I'm making an offer, Kane said abruptly. His voice was hard, brokering no argument. Full asking price. 250 million. Cash. Victoria nearly dropped the phone. She gripped her desk, her knuckles turning white. That is wonderful news. We can have the papers drawn up by morning. There is a condition, Kane interrupted. A strict contingency. I will not close on the property in its current state. It needs to be restaged. Completely. Victoria laughed nervously. Of course, Thomas. We have the best team in New York on retainer. I can have them fly in tomorrow. No, Kane said. I don't want your New York team. I want the designer who did the house I visited tonight. I want Keeley from Hearth and Home. If she doesn't stage it, I don't buy it. The line went silent. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Kane, surely you can't be serious. That woman she is inexperienced. She is nobody. She is the only one who understands what a home feels like, Kane replied. Get her, Victoria, or I walk. The next morning was a nightmare for Victoria. She tried everything to avoid making the call. She contacted 3 world-famous interior designers, offering to fly them in on private jets. She sent their portfolios to Kane. He rejected every single one without even opening the files. Then, the owner of the sovereign estate called. He was a ruthless oil tycoon who was tired of losing money on the empty mansion. He had heard about Kane's offer and the contingency. Victoria! He screamed over the phone, so loud she had to hold the receiver away from her ear. I don't care if you have to crawl on your knees. Get this Keeley woman. I'm locked into this exclusive contract with your firm for another month. But if Kane walks, I will sue you for every penny of the lost value. Victoria sat alone in her massive, glass-walled office. She looked at the family portrait on the wall, generations of Ashbournes looking down at her. If she lost this sale, the firm would lose its prestige. The investors would panic. The dynasty would crumble under her watch. She realized with a sick feeling in her stomach that she was trapped. The woman she had thrown out like trash was now the only person who could save her. She picked up her purse, put on her dark sunglasses to hide her eyes, and walked out to her car. She had to go to the strip mall. I was sitting at my messy desk, reviewing paint swatches for a small bungalow, when the door to Hearth and Home opened. The bell chimed cheerfully, a stark contrast to the icy silence that followed. Victoria Ashbourne stood in the doorway. She looked ridiculous in our small, cluttered office, dressed in a Chanel suit that cost more than our rent. She looked around with disdain before locking eyes with me. Grace started to stand up, but I raised a hand. It's okay, Grace. Victoria marched to my desk. She didn't sit down. She didn't say hello. She just opened her checkbook. I have a freelance job for you, she said tightly. 1 property. A week of work. I am prepared to offer you $250,000. It was $250,000. More money than I had made in 2 years. I looked at the checkbook, then I looked at the framed photo of Coulson on my desk. He was nearly a year and a half old now, and I was missing it. I leaned back in my chair. No. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? Did you hear the number? 250,000. I heard you. I said calmly. I'm busy, Victoria. Please leave. She looked like I had slapped her. She wasn't used to hearing no. She was trembling, not with sadness, but with rage and desperation. She needed this yes. What do you want? Victoria hissed, her voice cracking. She leaned over my desk, her composure fracturing. $500,000? Is that it? You want to bleed us? I don't want your money, Victoria, I said softly. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a document I had been carrying with me for months. My lawyer had drafted it, ready for this moment. It was a full, irrevocable custody agreement, granting me sole legal and physical custody of Coulson, with the Ashbourne Trust relinquishing all claims. I slid the paper across the scratched surface of my desk. I will stage the sovereign estate, but this is my fee. You sign full custody of Coulson over to me. I pointed to the window where a sedan had just pulled in 2 doors down. My lawyer's office is in the next unit, Victoria. I texted her when you pulled in. She is walking through the door right now to notarize your signature and file it with the court electronically. Victoria looked at the paper. She looked at the door as my lawyer entered. She looked at the massive sales contract on her phone. It wasn't a choice between me and the baby. It was a choice between the baby and her vanity. Vanity won. She snatched a pen from my desk. Fine, she spat. Take him. He cries too much anyway. Staging the sovereign estate was the hardest work of my life, but it was also a victory lap. I didn't try to fill all 50 rooms. I focused on the heart of the house, the ballroom, the dining hall, and the master suite. I worked for 3 days straight without sleeping, stripping the cold art and bringing in massive, textured rugs to dampen the echoes. When Thomas Kane walked in 5 days later, he didn't say a word. He just walked to the window of the master suite, looked out at the ocean, and nodded. The papers were signed an hour later. The Ashbournes got their millions. They saved their reputation. But I got the only thing that mattered. I was packing my gear into my truck when Victoria came out to the driveway. She looked triumphant, flushed with the success of the sale. But then she saw the car seat in the back of my truck. I had bought it with my last paycheck and installed it this morning, praying I wouldn't be driving home alone. Coulson was awake, kicking his shoes against the seat and babbling at a toy. I stopped at the driver's door and looked at her one last time. You were wrong about the envelope, Victoria, I said, my voice steady and strong. The envelope is the first thing people see. It's the only thing that makes them want to open the letter. Without me, you're just junk mail. I got in the truck, locked the doors, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. My future was babbling in the back seat, and for the first time in a year, we were finally going home.